CD 7.
Chapter 23. At the Gaetano Nicolosi and Son Construction Company of Palermo, whose number Montalbano had got from directory inquiries, nobody was answering the phone. It was too late in the day. The company's offices must have been deserted. Montalbano tried and tried again, eventually losing hope. Having cursed a few times to let off steam, he then requested the number of the engineer Cosimo Ziretta, assuming that he too was from Palermo. He'd guessed right. "Hello, this is Inspector Montalbano from Vigata. How did you manage the expropriation?" "What expropriation?" "The land that the road and tunnel you were building cuts through outside of Vigata." "Look, that's not my domain. I'm only responsible for the construction. That is, I was responsible until an ordinance put a halt to the whole project." "So who should I talk to?" "Somebody from the company." "I phoned there, but nobody answered." "Then try Commendatore Gaetano or his son Arturo. When they get out of Ucciardone." "Oh, really?" "Yes, extortion and bribery." "So there's no hope?" "Well, you can hope that the judges will be lenient and let them out in 5 years. Just kidding. Actually, you could try the company's lawyer, Di Bartolomeo." "Listen, Inspector, it's not the company's job to deal with expropriation procedures. That's up to the city council of the district in which the expropriated land is located." "Then what are you people doing there?" "That's none of your business." And the lawyer hung up. A little touchy, this Di Bartolomeo. Maybe his job was to cover the arses of Nicolosi, father and son, from the repercussions of their frauds. Except that this time he hadn't succeeded. The office hadn't been open 5 minutes before the company land surveyor Tumminello saw Inspector Montalbano standing in front of him, looking somewhat agitated. And in fact, it had been a restless night for Montalbano. He'd been unable to fall asleep, and so had stayed up reading Faulkner. The surveyor, whose troubled son, who was mixed up with hoodlums, brawls, and motorcycles, once again hadn't come home that night, turned pale, and his hands began to shake. Montalbano, noticing the other's reaction upon seeing him, imagined the worst. This guy's trying to hide something. He was still a cop, no matter how well read. "Is anything wrong?" asked Tumminello, expecting to hear that his son had been arrested, which in fact would have been a stroke of luck, or the least of all evils, since he might as easily have had his throat slit by his little friends. "I need some information about an expropriation." Tumminello visibly relaxed. "You over your scare now?" Montalbano couldn't resist asking him. "Yes," the surveyor admitted frankly. "I'm worried about my son. He didn't come home last night." "Does he do that often?" "Yes, actually. You see, he's mixed up with—" "Then you shouldn't worry," Montalbano cut him off. He didn't have time for the problems of youth. "I need to see the bill of sale or expropriation for the land used to build the Crasto tunnel. That's your area, isn't it?" "Yes, it is. But there's no point in taking out the documents. I know all the information. Tell me specifically what it is you want to know." "I want to know about the land that belonged to the Rizzitano family." "As I expected," said the surveyor. "When I heard about the weapons being discovered, and then about the 2 dead bodies, I thought, didn't those places belong to the Rizzitanos? And so I went and looked at the documents." "And what do the documents say?" "First, there's something you should know. There were a lot of proprietors whose land stood to be damaged, so to speak, by the construction of the road and tunnel. 45, to be exact." "Jesus!" "There's even a little postage stamp of land, 2,000 square metres, which, because it was divided up in an inheritance, has 5 owners. The note of transfer can't be made out collectively to the heirs. It must be made out individually to each one. Once our order was granted by the prefect, we offered the proprietors a modest sum, since most of the land in question was farmland. For Calogero Rizzitano, who was a presumed proprietor since there's no piece of paper confirming his ownership, there's no deed of inheritance since his father died without leaving a will. For Calogero Rizzitano, we had to resort to Article 143 of the Code of Civil Procedure, which concerns rightful claimants who cannot be found. As you probably know, Article 143 states... I'm not interested. How long ago did you make out this note of transfer? 10 years ago? Therefore, 10 years ago, Calogero Rizzitano could not be found. Nor after that either, because out of the 45 landowners, 44 appealed for a higher figure than the sum we were offering. And they got it. And the 45th, the one who did not, was Calogero Rizzitano. Exactly. And we put the money due to him in escrow, since, for us, to all intents and purposes, he's still alive. Nobody asked for a declaration of presumed death. So, when he reappears, he can pick up his money. When he reappears, the land surveyor had said. But everything pointed to the conclusion that Lillo Rizzitano was in no mood to reappear, or more likely, was no longer in any condition to reappear. Headmaster Burgio and Montalbano had taken for granted that the wounded Lillo, carried on board a military truck and driven who knows where on the night of July the 9th, had survived. But they had no idea how serious his wounds might have been. He could well have died in transit or in hospital, if they'd even brought him to a hospital. Why keep conjuring visions out of nothing? It was very possible that at the moment of their discovery, the two corpses in the Crasticedru were in better shape than Lillo Rizzitano had been in for some time. For 50 years and more, not a word, not a line, nothing. Not even when they requisitioned his land and demolished the remains of his house and everything else that belonged to him. The meanders of the labyrinth the inspector had willingly entered led him straight into a wall. But perhaps the labyrinth was being kind to him by preventing him from going any further, stopping him in front of the most logical, most natural solution. Supper was light, yet cooked in every regard, with a touch the Lord grants only very rarely to the chosen. But Montalbano did not thank the commissioner's wife. He merely looked at her with the eyes of a stray dog awarded a caress. The two men then retired to the study to chat. For Montalbano, the commissioner's dinner invitation had been like a life-preserver thrown to a man drowning not in a stormy sea, but in the flat, unrippled calm of boredom. The first thing they discussed was Catania, and they concurred that informing the Catania police of their investigation of Brancato had led, as its first result, to the elimination of the very same Brancato. "We're like a sieve," the commissioner said bitterly. "We can't take one step without our enemies knowing about it. Brancato had Ingrassia killed because he was getting too nervous, but when the people pulling the strings learned that we had Brancato in our sights, they took care of him as well. And so the trail we were so painstakingly following was conveniently obliterated." He was gloomy. The idea that moles were planted everywhere offended him. It embittered him more than a betrayal by a family member. Then, after a long pause during which Montalbano did not open his mouth, the commissioner asked, "How's your investigation of the Crasticedru murders coming along?" From the commissioner's tone of voice, Montalbano could tell that his superior viewed this investigation as mere recreation for the inspector, a pastime he was being allowed to pursue before he returned to more serious matters. "I've managed to find out the man's name, too," he said, feeling vindicated in the eyes of the commissioner, who gave a start, astonished and now interested. "You are extraordinary. Tell me how." Montalbano told him everything, even mentioning the theatricals he'd performed for De Dominicis, and the commissioner was quite amused. The inspector concluded with an admission of failure of sorts. It made no sense to continue the search, he said, since, among other things, nobody could prove that Lillo Rizzitano wasn't dead. All the same, the Commissioner said after a moment's reflection, if somebody really wants to disappear, it can be done. How many cases have we seen where people apparently vanish into thin air and then suddenly there they are? I don't want to cite Pirandello, but let's take Sciascia at least. Have you read the little book about the disappearance of Majorana, the physicist? Of course. I am convinced, as was Sciascia himself, that in the end Majorana wanted to disappear and succeeded. He did not commit suicide. He was too religious. I agree. And what about that very recent case of the Roman university professor who stepped out of his home one day and was never seen again? Everybody looked for him, police, carabinieri, even his students who loved him. It was a planned disappearance, and he also succeeded. True, Montalbano concurred. Then he thought about what they were saying and looked at his superior. It sounds to me as if you're encouraging me to continue the investigation, though on another occasion you reproached me for getting too involved in this case. So what? Now you're convalescing, whereas the other time you were on the job. There's quite a difference, I think, the Commissioner replied. Montalbano returned home and paced from room to room. After his meeting with the surveyor, he had decided to screw the whole investigation, convinced that Rizzitano was good and dead. Now the Commissioner had gone and resurrected him, so to speak. Didn't the early Christians use the word dormitio to mean death? It was quite possible Rizzitano had put himself in sleep, as the Freemasons used to say. Fine. But if that was the case, Montalbano would have to find a way to bring him out of the deep well in which he was hiding. That would require something big, something that would make a lot of noise, something the newspapers and television stations all over Italy would talk about. He had to unleash a bombshell. But what? He needed to forget about logic and dream up something fantastic. It was 11 o'clock, too early to turn in. He lay down on the bed, fully dressed, and read Pylon. At midnight last night, the search for the body of Roger Schumann, racing pilot who plunged into the lake on Saturday p.m., was finally abandoned by a 3-seater biplane of about 80 horsepower, which managed to fly out over the water and return without falling to pieces, and dropping a wreath of flowers into the water approximately 3/4 of a mile away from the spot where Schumann's body is generally supposed to be. There were only a few lines left until the end of the novel, but the inspector sat up in bed with a wild look in his eyes. "It's insane," he said, "but I'm going to do it. Is Signora Ingrid there? I know it's late, but I need to speak to her."
"Signora no home. You say, I write."
The Cardamones specialized in finding housekeepers in places where not even Tristan da Cunha would have dared set foot. "Ma now tu papao," said the inspector.
"No understand."
He'd cited the title of a Gauguin painting. That eliminated Polynesia and environs from the housekeeper's possible land of origin.
"You ready, right? Signora Ingrid phone Signor Montalbano when she come home."
When Ingrid got to Marinella, wearing an evening dress with a slit all the way up to her arse, it was already past 2 in the morning. She hadn't batted an eyelash at the inspector's request to see her right away.
"Sorry, but I didn't have time to change. I was at the most boring party."
"What's wrong? You don't look right to me. Is it simply because you were bored at the party?"
"No, your intuition's right. It's my father-in-law. He started pestering me again. The other morning he pounced on me when I was still in bed. He wanted me right away. I convinced him to leave by threatening to scream.
Then we'll have to take care of it.
How?
We'll give him another massive dose. At Ingrid's questioning glance, he opened a desk drawer that had been locked, took out an envelope, and handed it to her. Ingrid, seeing the photos portraying her getting fucked by her father-in-law, first turned pale, then blushed.
Did you take these?
Montalbano weighed the pros and cons. If he told her it was a woman who took them, Ingrid might knife him then and there. Yep, it was me. The Swedish woman's mighty slap thundered in his skull, but he was expecting it. I'd already sent 3 to your father-in-law. He got scared and stopped bothering you for a while. Now I'll send him another 3. Ingrid sprang forward, her body pressing against Montalbano's, her lips forcing his open, her tongue seeking and caressing his. Montalbano felt his legs giving out, and luckily Ingrid withdrew.
"Calm down," she said. "It's over. It was just to say thank you."
On the backs of 3 photos personally chosen by Ingrid, Montalbano wrote, "Resign from all your posts, or next time you'll be on TV." "I'm going to keep the rest here," said the inspector. "When you need them, let me know."
"I hope it won't be for a long time."
"I'll send them tomorrow morning, and then I'll make an anonymous phone call that'll give him a heart attack. Now listen, because I have a long story to tell you, and when I'm done, I'm going to ask you to lend me a hand." He got up at the crack of dawn, having been unable to sleep even a wink after Ingrid had left. He looked in the mirror. His face was a wreck, maybe even worse than after he'd been shot. He went to the hospital for a checkup, and they pronounced him perfect. The 5 medicines they'd been giving him were reduced to just 1. Then he went to the Montelusa savings bank, where he kept the little money he was able to put aside. He asked to meet privately with the manager. "I need 10 million lire. "Do you need a loan, or have you got enough in your account?" "I've got it." "I don't understand then. What's the problem?" "The problem is that it's for a police operation I want to pay for myself without risking the state's money. If I go to the cashier now and ask for 10 million in bills of 100,000, it'll seem strange. That's why I need your help." Understanding and proud to take part in a police operation, the manager bent over backwards for Montalbano. Ingrid pulled her car up alongside the inspector's, right in front of the road sign indicating the superhighway for Palermo just outside Montelusa. Montalbano gave her a bulging envelope with the 10 million lire inside, and she put it in her shoulder bag. "Call me at home as soon as you're done, and be careful not to get your purse snatched." She smiled, waved him a kiss from her fingertips, and put her car in gear. In Vigata, he got a new supply of cigarettes. On his way out of the tobacco shop, he noticed a big green poster with black lettering, freshly pasted up, inviting the townspeople to attend a cross-country motorbike race the following Sunday, starting at 3 in the afternoon, in the place called the Krasticedru Flats. He could never have hoped for such a coincidence. Perhaps the labyrinth had been moved to pity and was opening another path for him. Chapter 24. The Krasticedru Flats, which stretched out behind the rocky spur, weren't close to being flat, not even in dreams. But the vales, jags, and marshes made it an ideal place for a cross-country motorcycle race. The weather that day was a definite foretaste of summer, and people didn't wait for 3 o'clock to go out to the flats. Actually, they began to gather in the morning. Grandmothers, grandfathers, tots and teens, and everyone else determined not so much to watch a race as to enjoy a day in the country. That morning, Montalbano phoned Niccolò Zitto. "Are you coming to the cross-country motorbike race this afternoon?" "Me? Why should I? We've sent one of our sports reporters and a cameraman over there. Actually, I was suggesting that we go together, the two of us, just for fun." They got to the flats at about 3:30, but there was no sign the race would be starting any time soon. There already was, however, a deafening racket, produced mostly by 50 or so motorcycles being tested and revved up, and by loudspeakers blasting raucous music. "Since when are you interested in sport?" Zito asked in amazement. "Now and then I get the urge." Although they were outside, they had to shout to converse. As a result, when a little touring plane trailing its publicity banner appeared high in the sky over the ridge of the Crusty Cedru, few in the crowd noticed, since the noise of the plane, which is what usually makes people look up, couldn't reach their ears. The pilot must have noticed he would never get their attention in this fashion, since, after flying 3 tight circles round the crest of the Crusty Cedru, he headed straight for the flats and the crowd, going into an elegant dive and flying extremely low over everyone's head. He practically forced people to read his banner, and then to follow it with their eyes as he pulled up slightly, flew over the ridge 3 more times, descended to the point of almost touching the ground in front of the cave's gaping entrance, and then dropped a shower of rose petals from the aircraft. The crowd fell silent. They were all thinking of the 2 young lovers found dead in the Crusty Cedru as the small plane turned round and came back, skimming the ground, this time dropping countless little strips of paper. It then headed westward towards the horizon and disappeared. And while the banner had aroused a lot of curiosity, since it wasn't advertising a soft drink or a furniture factory, but displayed only the 2 names Lisetta and Mario, and the rain of rose petals had given the crowd a kind of thrill, the words on the strips of paper, all identical, set them all guessing, sending them on a lively merry-go-round of speculation and conjecture. What indeed was the meaning of Lisetta and Mario announce their reawakening? It couldn't be a wedding or christening announcement. So what was it? Among the swirl of questions, only one thing seemed certain, that the plane, the petals, the pieces of paper, and the banner had something to do with the dead lovers found in the Crusty Cedru. Then the races began, and the people watched and amused themselves. Niccolò Zito, upon seeing the rose petals fall from the plane, had told Montalbano not to move from where he stood, and had then disappeared into the crowd. He returned 15 minutes later, followed by a free-channel cameraman. "Will you grant me an interview?" "Of course." This unexpected compliance on Montalbano's part convinced the newsman of his suspicion, which was that the inspector was involved up to his neck in this business with the aircraft. "Just a few minutes ago, during the preliminaries for the cross-country motorcycle race currently taking place here in Vigata, we were all witness to an extraordinary event. A small advertising plane," and here he followed with a description of what had just occurred. "Since, by a fortunate coincidence, we have Inspector Salvo Montalbano here with us among the crowd, we would like to ask him a few questions. In your opinion, Inspector, who are Lisetta and Mario?" "I could dodge the question," the inspector said bluntly, "and say I don't know anything about this, and that it might be the work of some newlyweds who wished to celebrate their marriage in an original way. But I would be contradicted by what is written on that piece of paper, which speaks not of marriage, but of reawakening. I shall therefore answer honestly and say that Lisetta and Mario were the names of the 2 young people found murdered inside the cave of the Crusty Cedru, that spur of rock right here in front of us."
"But what does all this mean?"
"I can't really say. You'd have to ask whoever it was that organized the plane stunt." "How were you able to identify the 2? "By chance." "Could you tell us their last names?" "No. I could, but I won't. I can disclose that she was a young woman from these parts, and he was a sailor from the north. I should add that the person who wanted, in such manifest fashion, to remind us of their rediscovery, which this person calls reawakening, Forgot about the dog, which, poor thing, also had a name. He was called Kitmir, and was an Arab dog. But why would the murderer have wanted to stage such a scene? Wait a second. Who said that the murderer and the person behind this spectacle are one and the same? I, for one, don't believe they are. "I've got to run and edit the report," said Niccolò Zitto, giving Montalbano a strange look. Soon the crews from Televigata, the Rai Regional News, and the other private stations arrived. Montalbano answered all their questions politely and with, for him, unnatural ease. Prey to violent hunger pangs, he stuffed himself with seafood appetizers at the Trattoria San Calogero, and then raced home, turned on the television, and tuned into the free channel. In his report on the mysterious aeroplane, Niccolò Zitto piled it on thick, pumping up the story in every way possible. What crowned it all, however, was not his own interview, which was aired in its entirety, but another interview which Montalbano hadn't expected, with the manager of the Publi 2000 agency of Palermo, which Zitto had tracked down easily, since it was the only advertising agency in western Sicily that had an aeroplane available for publicity. The manager, still visibly excited, recounted that a beautiful young woman— "Jesus, what a woman! She looked unreal, she really did, like a model in a magazine. Jesus, was she beautiful! An obvious foreigner because she spoke bad Italian. Did I say bad? I'm wrong, actually. On her lips our words were like honey." No, he couldn't be sure as to her nationality, maybe German or English, had come to the agency 4 days earlier. God, an apparition! And had asked about the plane. She had explained in great detail what she wanted written on the banner and the strips of paper. Yes, the rose petals were also her doing. And, oh yes, as for the place, was she ever particular? Very precise. Then the pilot, on his own, the manager explained, had a brilliant idea. Instead of releasing the pieces of paper at random along the coastal road, he thought it would be better to drop them on a large crowd that had gathered to watch a race. The lady, for the love of God, let's stop talking about her or my wife will kill me, paid in advance, cash, and had the invoice made out to a certain Rosemarie Antwerpen at a Brussels address. He had asked nothing more of the lovely stranger. God! But then, why should he have? She certainly wasn't asking them to drop a bomb, and she was so beautiful and refined and polite, and what a smile! A dream! Montalbano relished it all. He had advised Ingrid, "You must make yourself even more beautiful than usual. That way, when they see you, they won't know what's what any more." Televigata went wild with the story of the mysterious beauty, calling her Nefertiti resurrected, and cooking up a fanciful story intertwining the pyramids with the Crasticedru. But it was clear they were following the lead set by Niccolò Zitto's story on their competitor's news programme. Even the regional Rai News gave the matter extensive coverage. Montalbano was getting the uproar, the commotion, the resonance he had sought. His idea had turned out to be right. "Montalbano, it's the Commissioner. I just heard about the plane. Congratulations! A stroke of genius. The credit goes to you. It was you who told me to carry on, remember? I'm trying to flush our man out. If he doesn't turn up reasonably soon, it means he's no longer among us. Good luck. Keep me posted. Oh, it was you, of course, who paid for the plane. Of course. I'm counting on my promised bonus." "Inspector, this is Headmaster Burgio. My wife and I are speechless with admiration. What an idea!" "Let's hope for the best. Don't forget, Inspector, if Lillo should turn up, please let us know." On the midnight edition of the news, Niccolò Zito devoted more time to the story and showed photos of the two corpses in the Crusticedru, zooming in on the images in detail. Provided courtesy of the ever-eager Giacomuzzi, thought Montalbano. Zito isolated the body of the young man, whom he called Mario, then that of the young woman, whom he called Lisetta. Then he showed the aeroplane dropping rose petals, and gave a close-up of the words on the strips of paper. From here he went on to weave a tale that was part mystery, part tearjerker, and decidedly not in the free channels style, but rather more like televigata fare. Why were the two young lovers killed? What sad fate led them to that end? Who was it that took pity on them and set them up in the cave? Had the beautiful woman who showed up at the advertising agency perhaps returned from the past to demand revenge on the victim's behalf? And what connection was there between this beauty and the two kids from 50 years ago? How were we to understand the word reawakened? And how did Inspector Montalbano happen to know even the name of the terracotta dog? How much did he know about this mystery?
Salvo? Hi, it's Ingrid. I hope you didn't think I ran off with your money.
Come on. Why, was there some left?
Yes. The whole thing cost less than half the amount you gave me. I've got the rest with me. I'll give it back to you as soon as I return to Montelusa.
Where are you calling from?
Taormina. I met someone. I'll be back in 4 or 5 days. Did I do a good job? Did it go the way you wanted?
You did a fantastic job. Have fun.
Montalbano, it's Niccolò. Did you like the reports?
I think I deserve some thanks, no?
For what?
For doing exactly what you wanted. But I didn't ask you to do anything.
That's true, not directly at least.
Except that I'm not stupid, and so I gathered that you wanted the story to get as much publicity as possible and to be presented in a way that would touch people's hearts. I said things I will never live down for the rest of my life. Well, thanks, even though, I repeat, I still don't know why you want me to thank you.
You know, our switchboard has been overwhelmed with phone calls. The RAI, Fininvest, ANSA and all the national newspapers have asked for a videotape of the report. You've made quite a splash. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How much did the aeroplane cost you?
He slept splendidly, as gods pleased with their handiwork are said to sleep. He'd done everything possible, and even something impossible. Now there was nothing to do but wait for an answer. The message had been sent out in such a way as to allow somebody to decipher the code, as Alcide Marventano would say. The first phone call came in at 7 in the morning. It was Luciano Acquasanta of Il Mezzogiorno, who wanted to corroborate one of his opinions. Was it not possible the two young people were sacrificed in the course of some satanic rite? Why not? Said Montalbano, polite and open to anything. The second call came 15 minutes later. It was Stefania Quattrini from the magazine Essere Donna. Her theory was that Mario was caught making love to Lisetta by another jealous woman, we know what sailors are like, who did away with both of them. She probably then skipped the country, but on her deathbed confided in her daughter, who in turn told her own daughter of the grandmother's crime. This girl, to make good in some way, had gone to Palermo, she spoke with a foreign accent, didn't she, and arranged the whole business with the aeroplane. Why not? Said Montalbano, polite and open to anything. Cosimo Zappalà of the weekly magazine Vivere communicated his hypothesis to Montalbano at 7:25. Lisetta and Mario, drunk on love and youth, were in the habit of strolling through the countryside hand in hand, naked as Adam and Eve. Surprised one unlucky day by a contingent of retreating German soldiers, also drunk, but on fear and ferocity, they were raped and murdered. On his deathbed, one of the Germans— and here this version linked up curiously with Stefania Quattrini's. "Why not?" said Montalbano, polite and open to anything. At 8, Fazio knocked on the door and brought him all the dailies available in Vigata, as he'd been ordered to do the night before. The inspector leafed through them while repeatedly answering the phone. All of them, with greater or lesser degrees of emphasis, reported the story. The headline that most amused him was the one in the Corriere, which read, "Police Inspector Identifies Terracotta Dog Dead for 50 Years. All of it, even the irony, was grist for his mill. Adelina was amazed to find him at home and not out, as was usually the case. "Adelina, I'm going to be staying home for a few days. I'm waiting for an important phone call, so I want you to make my siege comfortable."
"I didn't understand a word you said."
Montalbano then explained that her task was to alleviate his voluntary seclusion by putting a little extra imagination in her lunch and dinner dishes. Around 10, Livia called.
"What's going on? Your phone is always busy."
"I'm sorry, it's just that I've been getting all these calls in reference to—"
"I know what they're in reference to. I saw you on TV. You were so unself-conscious and glib. You didn't seem yourself. It's obvious you're better off when I'm not around."
He rang Fazio at headquarters and asked him to bring all mail home to him and to buy an extension cord for the phone. The mail, he added, should be brought to him at home each day as soon as it arrived. And Fazio should pass the word on. Anyone who asked for him at the office must be given his private number by the switchboard operator, with no questions asked. Less than an hour passed before Fazio arrived with 2 unimportant postcards and the extension cord. "What's new at the office?" "What's new? Nothing. You're the one who attracts the big stuff. Inspector Augello only gets the little shit. Purse snatchings, petty theft, a mugging here and there." "I attract the big stuff. What's that supposed to mean?" "It means what I said. My wife, for instance, is scared of rats. Well, I swear she draws them to her like a magnet. Wherever she goes, the rats soon arrive." For 48 hours he'd been like a dog on a chain. His field of action was only as large as the extension cord would allow, and therefore he could neither walk on the beach nor go out for a run. He carried the phone with him everywhere, even when he went to the bathroom, and every now and then, the mania took hold of him after 24 hours, he would pick up the receiver and bring it to his ear to see if it was working. On the morning of the 3rd day, a thought came into his mind. Why bother to wash if you can't go outside? This was followed by another, closely related thought. So what need is there to shave? On the morning of the 4th day, filthy and bristly, wearing slippers and the same shirt since the first day, he gave Adelina a fright. "Maria Santissima, signori! What happened to you? Are you sick?" "Yes." "Why don't you call a doctor?" "It's not the sort of thing for a doctor." He was a very great tenor, acclaimed in all the world. That evening he was to sing at the Cairo Opera, at the old theatre which hadn't yet burned down, though he knew well that it would soon be devoured by flames. He'd asked an attendant to inform him the moment Signor Gege sat down in his box, the 5th from the right on the 2nd level. He was in costume, the last touches having been applied to his makeup. He heard the call, "Who's on next?" He didn't move. The attendant arrived, out of breath, and told him that Signor Gege, who hadn't died, this was well known, he'd escaped to Egypt, hadn't shown up yet. He dashed onto the stage, looking out into the theatre through a small opening in the curtain. It was full. The only empty box was the 5th from the right, 2nd level. He made a split-second decision. He returned to his dressing room, took off his costume, and put his regular clothes back on. leaving the makeup, including the long grey beard and thick white eyebrows, untouched. Nobody would ever recognize him again, and therefore he would never sing again. He well understood that his career was over, and he would have to scramble to survive. But he didn't know what to do about it. Without JJ, he couldn't sing. He woke up bathed in sweat. In his own fashion, he had produced a classic Freudian dream, that of the empty theatre box. What did it mean? That the pointless wait for Lillo Rizzitano would ruin his life. "Inspector, it's Headmaster Burgio. It's been a while since we last spoke. Have you any news of our mutual friend?" "No." Monosyllabic, hasty, at the risk of seeming impolite, he had to discourage long or pointless phone conversations. If Rizzitano were to make up his mind, he might think twice if he found the line busy. "I'm afraid the only way we'll ever get to talk to Lillo, if you'll forgive my saying so, is to hire a medium." He had a big squabble with Adelina. The housekeeper had just gone into the kitchen when he heard her start yelling. Then she appeared in the bedroom. "Signori, you didn't eat nothing yesterday for lunch or dinner." "I wasn't hungry, Adelie." "I worked myself to death cooking delicious things, and you just turn up your nose at 'em." "I don't turn up my nose at them. I'm just not hungry, as I said." "And this house has become a pigsty. You don't want me to wash the floor. You don't want me to wash your clothes. For 5 days you've been wearing the same shirt and the same shorts. You stink, signor." "I'm sorry, Adelina. I'll snap out of it. You'll see." "Well, let me know when you snap out of it, and I'll come back, 'cause I ain't setting foot back in here. Call me when you're feeling better." He went out onto the veranda, sat down on the bench, put the telephone beside him, and stared at the sea. He couldn't do anything else. Read, think, write. Nothing. Only stare at the sea. He was losing himself in the bottomless well of an obsession, and he knew it. He remembered a film he'd seen, perhaps based on a novel by Dürrenmatt, in which a police inspector stubbornly kept waiting for a killer who was supposed to pass through a certain place in the mountains, when in fact the guy would never come through there again. But the inspector didn't know this, and so he waited, and meanwhile, days, months, years went by. Around 11 o'clock that same morning, the telephone rang. Nobody had called since Headmaster Burgio several hours before. Montalbano didn't pick up the receiver. He froze as though paralyzed. He knew with utter certainty, though he couldn't have explained why, who would be there at the other end. He made an effort and picked up. "Hello? Inspector Montalbano?" A fine, deep voice, even though it belonged to an old man. "Yes, this is he," said Montalbano, and he couldn't refrain from adding, "Finally." "Finally," the other repeated. They both remained silent a moment, listening to their breathing. "I've just landed at Palermo. I could be at your place in Vigata by 1:30 this afternoon at the latest, if that's all right with you. Perhaps you could tell me exactly how to find you. I've been away a long time. 51 years. Chapter 25. He dusted, swept, and scrubbed the floors with the speed of a slapstick silent movie. Then he went into the bathroom and washed as he had done only once before in his life, when, at age 16, he'd gone on his first date. He took an interminable shower, sniffing his armpits and the skin on his arms, then doused himself for good measure with eau de cologne. He knew he was being ridiculous, but he chose his best suit, his most serious tie, and polished his shoes until they looked as if they had their own internal light source. Then he got the idea to set the table, but only for one. He was, it was true, in the throes of a canine hunger, but he was sure he would not be able to swallow. He waited endlessly. 1:30 came and went, and he felt sick and had something like a fainting spell. He poured himself a double shot of whiskey and gulped it down. Finally, liberation, the sound of a car coming up the driveway. He quickly threw the front door wide open. There was a taxi with a Palermo license plate, and a very well-dressed old man got out, holding a cane in one hand and an overnight bag in the other. The man paid the driver, and while the car was manoeuvring to leave, he looked around. He stood erect, head high, and cut an impressive figure. Immediately Montalbano felt he had seen him somewhere before. He went out to meet him. "Is it all houses around here?" the old man asked. "Yes." "There used to be nothing, only brush and sand and sea." They hadn't greeted each other or introduced themselves. They already knew one another. "I'm almost blind. I see very poorly," said the old man, seated on the bench on the veranda. "But it seems very beautiful here, very peaceful." Only then did the inspector realize where he had seen the old man. Actually, it wasn't exactly him, but a perfect double, a jacket-flap photo of Jorge Luis Borges. "Would you like something to eat?" "You're very kind," said the old man after a moment's hesitation. "But just a small salad, perhaps some lean cheese and a glass of wine." "Let's go inside. I've set the table." "Will you eat with me?" Montalbano had a knot in the pit of his stomach, but above all he felt strangely moved. "I've already eaten," he lied. "Then, if you don't mind, could you set me a place out here?" Rizzitano had used the Sicilian verb consare, meaning to set the table, like an outsider trying his best to speak the local language. "What made me realize you'd figured almost everything out," Rizzitano said while eating slowly, "was an article in the Corriere. I can't watch television anymore, you know. All I see are shadows that hurt my eyes." "TV hurts my eyes too, and my vision is excellent," said Montalbano. "But I already knew you had found Lisetta and Mario." "I have 2 sons. One's an engineer, the other's a teacher, like me. Both married. One of my daughters-in-law is a rabid leghista, an insufferable imbecile. Actually, she's very fond of me, but she considers me an exception, since she thinks all Southerners are criminals, or in the best of cases, lazy. She never misses an opportunity to say to me, 'You know, Papa, down in your parts.' For her, my parts extend from Sicily up to and including Rome. 'In your parts, so-and-so was murdered, so-and-so was kidnapped, so-and-so was arrested, so-and-so planted a bomb.' Well, one day she said, 'In your own town, inside a cave, they found 2 young people murdered 50 years ago.'" "How's that?" Montalbano interjected. "Does your family know you're from Vigata?" "Of course they know. However, I never told anyone, not even my wife, rest her soul, that I still owned property in Vigata. I said my parents and most of my relatives had been wiped out during the bombing. In no way could anybody connect me with the corpses in the Crasticedru. They didn't know that it was on a piece of my land. But when I heard the news, I got sick with a high fever. Everything started coming violently back to me. But I was telling you about the article in the Corriere. It said that a police inspector in Vigata, the same one who'd found the bodies, had not only succeeded in identifying the 2 young victims, but had also learned that the terracotta dog's name was Kitmir. Well, that made me certain you'd managed to find my university thesis, and so I knew you were sending me a message. I lost some time persuading my sons to let me come here alone. I told them I wanted to revisit, one last time before I die, the place where I was born and lived as a boy."
Montalbano was still not convinced on this point, so he went back to it. "So everybody in your home knew that you were from Vigata?"
"Why should I have hidden it? I never changed my name either, and have never had false documents."
"You mean you were able to disappear without ever wanting to disappear?"
"Exactly. A person is found when somebody really needs to find him, or really sets his mind to it. In any case, you must believe me when I say that I've lived my life with my real first and last names. I entered competitions and even won. I taught, I got married, had children, and I have grandchildren who bear my name. Now I'm retired, and my pension is made out to Calogero Rizzitano, birthplace Vigata."
"But you must at least have written to, say, the town hall or the university to request the necessary documents."
"Of course. I did write to them, and they sent me what I needed. You mustn't make a mistake of historical perspective, Inspector. At the time, nobody was looking for me."
"But you didn't even claim the money the city government owed you for the expropriation of your land."
"That was precisely the point. I'd had no contact with Vigata for 30 years. Since the older you get, the less you need documents from your birthplace. But the documents required for the expropriation money, those were a little risky. Somebody might have remembered me then, whereas I had turned my back on Sicily long before that. I didn't want, I still don't want, to have anything to do with it. If there existed some kind of special device that could remove the blood circulating in my veins, I'd be happy."
"Would you like to go for a walk along the beach?" Montalbano asked, when his guest had finished eating. They'd been walking for 5 minutes, the old man leaning on his cane, but holding on to Montalbano with his other arm, when he asked, "Would you tell me how you were able to identify Lisetta and Mario? And how did you figure out that I was involved? Forgive me, but walking and talking at the same time is very taxing for me." As Montalbano was telling him the whole story, now and then the old man would twist his mouth as if to say that was not how it went. Montalbano then felt Rizzitano's arm weighing heavier on his. Wrapped up in his own words, he hadn't noticed that the old man was tired from the walk. "Shall we go back?" They sat down again on the bench on the veranda. "Well," said Montalbano, "why don't you tell me how things really went?" "Yes, of course. That's why I'm here. But it costs me a great deal of effort." "I'll try to spare you the effort. Tell you what, I'll say what I think happened, and you correct me if I'm wrong." "All right." "Well, one day in early July 1943, Lisetta and Mario came to your house at the foot of the Cresto, where at that moment you were living alone. Lisetta had run away from Serra di Falco to rejoin her boyfriend, Mario Kunic, a sailor from the Pacinotti, a mother ship that was supposed to leave a few days later. The old man raised his hand, and the inspector stopped. "Excuse me, but that's not what happened. And I remember everything, down to the smallest details. The memory of the aged becomes clearer and clearer with time. It has no pity. On the evening of the 6th of July, around 9 o'clock, I heard someone knocking desperately at the door. I went to see who it was, and there was Lisetta, who had run away. She'd been raped,
on her way from Serra di Falco to Vigata. No, by her father, the night before. Montalbano didn't feel like opening his mouth. "And that was only the beginning," said the old man. "The worst was yet to come. Lisetta had confided to me that now and then her father, Uncle Stefano, as I used to call him since we were related, used to take certain liberties with her. One day, Stefano Moscato, who, not long before, had come out of prison and been evacuated to Serra di Falco with the rest of the family, discovered the letters that Mario had sent to his daughter. He told her he wanted to talk to her about something important, then took her out to the country, threw the letters in her face, beat her, and raped her. Lisetta was... she'd never been with a man before. But she didn't create a scandal. She had very strong nerves. The next day she simply ran away and came to see me. I was like a brother to her. More than a brother. The following morning I went into town to tell Mario that Lisetta had come. Mario showed up early that afternoon. I left them alone and went for a walk in the country. When I got back home around 7 that evening, Lisetta was alone. Mario had returned to his ship. We made some supper, and then we went to the window to watch the fireworks. That's what they looked like, of the Allied strike on Vigata. Lisetta finally went upstairs to sleep in my bedroom. I stayed downstairs and read a book by the light of an oil lamp. That was when... Rizzitano broke off, exhausted, and heaved a long sigh. "Would you like a glass of water?" The old man seemed not to have heard him. "That was when I heard someone shouting in the distance. Actually, at first it sounded to me like a wailing animal, a howling dog. But in fact, it was Uncle Stefano calling his daughter." The sound of that voice made my hair stand on end, because it was the agonizing cry of a cruelly abandoned lover who was suffering and screaming out his pain like an animal. It was not the voice of a father looking for his daughter. It upset me terribly. I opened the door. Outside was total darkness. I shouted that I was alone in the house. I said, "Why come looking for your daughter at my house?" Then suddenly there he was, in front of me, as though catapulted. He ran inside like a madman, trembling, insulting me and Lisetta. I tried to calm him and approached him. He punched me in the face, and I fell backwards, stunned. Finally, I noticed he had a pistol in his hand. He said he was going to kill me. Then I made a mistake. I retorted that he only wanted his daughter so he could rape her again. He shot at me, but missed. He was too agitated. Then he took better aim, but another shot exploded in the room. I used to keep a loaded shotgun in my room near the bed. Lisetta had taken it and fired at her father from the top of the stairs. Struck in the shoulder, Uncle Stefano staggered, and his weapon fell from his hand. Coldly, Lisetta ordered him to get out, or she would finish him off. I have no doubt she would have done so without hesitation. Uncle Stefano looked his daughter long in the eye, then began to whimper with his mouth closed, and not only, I suspect, because of his wound. Then he turned his back and left. I bolted all the doors and windows. I was terrified, and it was Lisetta who gave me back my courage and strength.
We remained barricaded inside the next morning as well.
Around 3 o'clock, Mario arrived. We told him what had happened, and he decided to spend the night with us. He didn't want to leave us alone there, since Lisetta's father would surely be back. Around midnight, a horrific bombing raid was launched over Vigata, but Lisetta remained calm because her Mario was with her. On the morning of July the 9th, I went to Vigata to see if the house we owned in town was still standing. I strongly advised Mario not to open the door for anyone, and to keep the shotgun within reach. He stopped.
My throat is dry.
Montalbano ran into the kitchen and returned with a glass and a pitcher of cold water. The old man took the glass in both hands. His whole body was shaking. The inspector felt keenly sorry. "If you'd like to rest a while, we can resume later." The old man shook his head. "If I stop now, I'll never resume." I stayed in Vigata until late afternoon. The house hadn't been destroyed, but it was a tremendous mess. Doors and windows blown out by the shock waves, upended furniture, broken glass. I cleaned up as best I could, and that kept me busy till evening. My bicycle was gone from the entrance hall, stolen, so I headed back to the Crasto on foot. It was an hour's walk. Actually, I had to walk by the side of the main road because there were so many military vehicles, Italian and German, moving in both directions. The moment I arrived at the top of the dirt road that led to my house, 2 American fighter-bombers appeared overhead and started machine-gunning and dropping fragmentation bombs. The planes were flying very low to the ground and roaring like thunder. I threw myself into a ditch, and almost immediately was struck very hard in the back by something that I first thought was a large stone sent flying by an exploding bomb. In fact, it was a military boot, with the foot still inside, severed just above the ankle. I sprang to my feet and started running up the driveway, but I had to stop to vomit. My legs were giving out, and I fell 2 or 3 times, as behind me the noise of the aircraft began to fade, and I could hear the cries and screams and prayers more clearly, and the orders being shouted between the burning trucks. The instant I set foot in my house, I heard 2 shots ring out upstairs, quickly, one right after the other. Uncle Stefano, I thought, had managed to get inside the house and carry out his revenge. Near the door there was a big iron bar that was used to bolt it shut. I grabbed it and went upstairs without a sound. My bedroom door was open. A man was standing just inside with his back to me, still holding the revolver in his hand. The old man, who until this point hadn't once looked up at the inspector, now stared him straight in the eye. "In your opinion, do I have the face of a murderer?" "No," said Montalbano. "And if you're referring to the man in the room with the gun in his hand, you can set your mind at rest. You acted out of necessity, in self-defense. Someone who kills a man is still someone who kills a man. The legal formulas come later. What counts is the will of the moment. And I wanted to kill that man, no matter what he had done to Lisetta and Mario. So I raised the rod and dealt him a blow to the nape of the neck with all my might, hoping to shatter his skull. He fell forward, revealing the scene on the bed. There were Mario and Lisetta, naked, clutching one another in a sea of blood. They must have been making love when they were surprised by the bombs falling so close to the house, and then embraced each other like that out of fear. There was nothing more to be done for them. Something, perhaps, could still have been done for the man on the floor behind me, who was gasping his last. With a kick, I turned him face up. He was some flunky of Uncle Stefano's, a cheap thug. Systematically, with the iron bar, I began to beat his head to a pulp. And then I went crazy. I started running from room to room, singing. Have you ever killed anyone? Yes, unfortunately. You say unfortunately, which means you felt no satisfaction. What I felt was not so much satisfaction as joy. I felt happy. I sang, as I said. Then I collapsed in a chair, overwhelmed by the horror, horrified with myself. I hated myself. They had managed to turn me into a murderer, and I hadn't been able to resist. On the contrary, I was pleased to have done it. The blood inside me was infected, no matter how hard I might try to cleanse it with reason, education, culture, and whatever else you want. It was the blood of the Rizzitanos, of my grandfather and father, of men the honest people in town preferred not to mention. Men like them, even worse than them. Then, in my delirium, a possible solution appeared. If Mario and Lisetta were to go on sleeping, then all this horror had never happened. It was a nightmare, a bad dream. And so... The old man couldn't go on. Montalbano was afraid he would pass out. Let me tell the rest. You took the 2 kids' bodies, transported them to the cave, and set them up there. Yes, but that's easy to say. I had to carry them inside one by one. I was exhausted and literally soaked with blood. The second cave, the one you put the bodies in, was it also used to store black market goods? No. My father had closed up the entrance to it with a dry wall of stones. I removed the stones and later put them back in place when I was done. I used flashlights to help me see. We had quite a few at our country house. Now I had to find the symbols of sleep, the ones from the legend. The jug and the bowl with coins were easy enough. But what about the dog? Well, the previous Christmas in Vigata... I know the whole story, said Montalbano. When the dog was sold at auction, somebody in your family bought it. My father did. But since Mamma didn't like it, we put it in a storeroom in the cellar. I remembered it. When I had done everything and closed up the cave with the great hinged boulder, it was pitch dark outside, and I felt almost at peace. Lisetta and Mario really were asleep. Nothing had happened. And so the corpse I found upstairs on my return no longer frightened me. It didn't exist. It was the fruit of my war-ravaged imagination. Then utter pandemonium broke out. The house began to shake from bombs exploding just a few yards away, but I couldn't hear any aeroplanes. They were shelling from the ships at sea. I raced outside, afraid I might get buried under the rubble if the house were hit. On the horizon it looked as if day were breaking. What was all that light, I wondered? Suddenly, behind me, The house exploded, literally, and I was struck on the head with a piece of debris and passed out. When I opened my eyes, the light on the horizon was even brighter, and I could hear a continuous, distant rumble. I managed to drag myself to the road and started waving and gesturing, but none of the passing vehicles would stop. They were all fleeing. I was in danger of being run over by a truck. Finally, one stopped, and an Italian soldier hoisted me aboard. From what they were saying, I gathered that the American invasion had begun. I begged them to take me with them, wherever they were going, and they did. What happened to me after that I doubt is of any interest to you. I'm very tired. Would you like to lie down a while? Montalbano had to carry him bodily, then helped him to undress. "Please forgive me," he said, "for awakening the sleepers and bringing you back to reality. It had to happen. Your friend Burgio, who was a big help to me, would love to see you again." "No, not me. And if you have no objection, you should act as if I never came." "No, of course not. I've no objection." "Do you want anything else from me?" "Nothing. Only to say that I'm deeply grateful to you for answering my call." They had nothing more to say to each other. The old man looked at his watch so closely he appeared to be sticking it in his eye. "Let's do this. Let me sleep for an hour or so. Then wake me up, call me a taxi, and I'll go back to Punta Raisi." Montalbano drew the blinds over the window and headed for the door. "Just a minute, Inspector." From the wallet he had laid on the night table, the old man took out a photograph and handed it to Montalbano. "This is my youngest granddaughter, 17 years old. Her name's Lisetta." Montalbano went over to a shaft of light. Except for the jeans she was wearing and the motor scooter she was leaning against, this Lisetta was identical to the other, a perfect likeness. He handed the photo back to Rizzitano. "Excuse me again, but could you bring me another glass of water?" Seated on the veranda, Montalbano answered the questions his policeman's mind was asking. The assassin's body, assuming they'd found it under the rubble, certainly could never have been identified. Lillo's parents had either believed that those remains belonged to their son, or that, according to the peasant's story, he'd been picked up by the soldiers as he was dying. And since they never heard from him again, he must surely have died somewhere. For Stefano Moscato, however, those remains belonged to his triggerman, who, after finishing his work, that is, after killing Lisetta, Mario and Lillo and disposing of their bodies, had returned to the house to steal a few things, but was crushed under the bombs. Assured that Lisetta was dead, he had come out with the story of the American soldier. But a relative of his from Serra di Falco, when he came to Vigata, had refused to believe it and severed relations with him. The photomontage recalled to mind the photograph the old man had shown him. Montalbano smiled. Elective affinities were a clumsy game compared to the unfathomable convolutions of the blood, which could give weight, form, and breath to memory. He glanced at his watch and gave a start. Well over an hour had passed. He went into the bedroom. The old man was enjoying a peaceful sleep, his breathing untroubled, his expression calm and relaxed. He was travelling through the land of dreams, no longer burdened with baggage. He could sleep a long time, since he had a wallet with money and a glass of water on the night table. Montalbano remembered the stuffed dog he'd bought for Livia in Pantelleria. He found it on top of the dresser, hidden behind a box. He put it on the floor, at the foot of the bed, then closed the door softly behind him.
Macmillan Digital Audio and Belinda hope you enjoyed the reading of
The Terracotta Dog by Andrea Camilleri, translated by Stephen Sartorelli and read by Mark Meadows.
Our audiobooks are becoming increasingly popular among travellers, families, and people who are on the go. If you really enjoyed this audiobook, please introduce your friends and family to the experience. We're sure they'll love you for it. If you want to hear more about our fabulous range of titles, please visit us online at belinda.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to always take a Belinda audiobook with you.